People voted for Brexit because they wanted lower migration, control of their borders.
And you
what
got
happened?
exactly the opposite.
We got exactly the opposite because Boris Johnson lied to the country and they flooded Britain with lots of low-skill, low-wage migration from outside of Europe. These terms like far-right, xenophobe, bigot, they've been expanded by progressives to such an extent, they're meaningless. Mass immigration, an effect of that has been the rape gang scandal because it has overwhelmingly involved Pakistani Muslim men.
What can be done about this?
I think that should give us courage.
Exposure to other people's perspectives.
Moving us in a good direction.
So many people outside the UK are deeply concerned about what's going on in the UK. What's going on in the UK?
Well, I was born in 1981. I can't remember a time in my life, I'm 43, that my country has been in this much of a state, to be honest. I actually joked on X fairly recently that we probably got 2 national elections left to save the UK, and someone who popped up in my replies was Elon Musk and said, no, actually, you've got 1 election left to save the UK. And at the root of that concern, I think it's not just the economy, the fact the economy's not working, we don't have a growth strategy. It's more fundamentally about immigration. It's about the immigration demographic crisis that is bearing down on the UK. I'm sure we'll get into it. It's about the scale of that crisis. And it's also a parallel concern about the way in which you cannot even challenge that crisis now, given that free speech is being dramatically curtailed and shut down. So at the root, it's this sense that, hang on, isn't the UK the home of Magna Carta, the home of free speech, free expression, individual liberty? You know, a strong, once upon a time, a strong nation state that achieved so much in the world. But now there's a widespread sense, both within the UK and outside the UK, that actually this country is now completely losing itself because of immigration.
And okay, so let's hit some basics. How many people live in the UK?
Oh, about 67, 68 million.
And just to be clear, how many, and I realize this is a tricky question because you don't have access to how many people are illegal by definition because they're illegal.
Well, there's about 1.2 million illegal migrants in the UK.
Oh, you know the figure that specifically?
Estimated, yeah.
Okay. And so how do they get in?
Right, so there's 2 parts of the immigration crisis in the UK. One is legal and the other is illegal.
Right.
So talking about illegal migration, the main expression of that right now are people coming over on the small boats from France. They get in a rubber dinghy, they basically sail across the channel, they arrive in the UK illegally. We've had more than 160,000 of those people arrive in the UK since 2018. More illegal migrants than we have people in the British Army, to put that in perspective.
Wow.
They're mainly young men under the age of 40.
Unskilled.
They're mainly from Islamic nations.
Okay.
We know that they've included terrorists who have gone on to try and plan to blow up the Israel embassy in London. We know that they've included criminals, rapists, and murderers. And so right now we have no functioning border. So our borders are basically broken. Nobody has, on the left or the right, has been able to fix that illegal migration crisis.
Okay, this is a lot here. So help me understand this. You're on an island. You have a navy. What is preventing you from...
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
sorry if that's a...
Sure.
So
Well,
your
no.
treaties, or what is preventing you from securing the border?
There's a few factors involved, but the main one, in my opinion, is we no longer have judicial legal sovereignty. We no longer have control over our own country because we are members of something called the European Convention on Human Rights, the ECHR, which is a European court, which is enshrined in our domestic law by Tony Blair's Human Rights Act, which basically allows foreign criminals and illegal migrants to file appeals with that ECHR in order to prevent their deportation. I would add to that, we also have a state which is falling over itself to give illegal migrants lots of welfare and to incentivize them to come.
Okay, so hold on. So when Brexit happened,
Yeah.
here, walk this way, they didn't, you still retain those treaty obligations.
So there's a lot of things we're still a part of that were not affected by Brexit. Brexit took us out of the European Union,
Okay.
but we are still in the European Convention on Human Rights. We don't have to be. A lot of Anglosphere countries are not in that.
Okay.
We have our own tradition of rights that go back 1,000 years. The political class are lying to people in my country when they say you have to be a member of the ECHR. That's not true. But, you know, it's funny you mentioned Brexit because this, too, is one of the interesting things about the UK right now. People voted for Brexit because they wanted lower migration, control of their borders.
And you
what
got
happened?
exactly the opposite.
We got exactly the
Yeah.
opposite because Boris Johnson lied to the country, because the big parties on the left and right lied to the electorate, and they flooded Britain with lots of low-skill, low-wage migration from outside of Europe. So all of the Italians and the French and the Spanish, well, they stopped coming. They say, and here's the
And the
stat you need
Polish
to know.
plumbers, yeah,
and the
yeah.
Polish plumbers. 81% of all migration into Britain today is from outside of Europe. I'm talking Pakistan, Nigeria, China, Eritrea. A lot of countries that don't just have radically different cultures, but I would argue are incompatible relative to our European neighbors.
Okay.
So Brexit was really, it gave voters an outcome that was the opposite of what they thought they were going to get.
Okay, so what is the response then? I'm going to pepper you with tough questions. What is the response then to the fact that this is really, you're some alt-right maniac, and this is really, yeah. Well, anybody who has a conversation about migration, even illegal migration, is an alt-right maniac.
Yeah.
Or they're a kind of white ethno-nationalist.
Yeah.
Well, what is the response to that?
So we have a Labour government that has used that very strategy. They've basically said anybody who cares about this issue is the far right,
Right.
that they are
Nazis.
misinformed,
Yeah.
bigots, xenophobes. But actually, if you look at how people are thinking and the polling around that, only 10 to 15% support this state policy of mass uncontrolled immigration. The forgotten majority,
Wow.
the vast majority of people in my country basically think like me. We want less immigration, we want controlled immigration.
So you mean 10 to 15% of the people in the UK are in support of mass?
They broadly
uncontrolled
support what we've currently got, which
That's
is large-scale
insane to me.
migration. It's a high number, but also don't forget a lot of those people don't know what is really going on in their country. They're just liberals positioning and flexing. They're not actually, aware of what is happening in the country. So, no. I mean, and also the other thing I would say, Peter, is these terms like far right, xenophobe, bigot, they've been expanded by progressives to such an extent, they're meaningless. Like, this isn't about, for me, this is not actually about race. Yeah, I mean, it really isn't. It's much more to do with culture. But having said that, the one thing I would add is I do believe that when you're looking at a situation that the UK is looking at, white Brits are going to be a minority by 2063. The foreign-born, people born outside the UK, will be a majority by 2079. You know, this is not that far away.
Yeah.
I do believe that when you see the rapid disintegration of the dominant ethnic group, that can have all kinds of implications and effects on a nation state, which are not positive.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about, and I've never understood why it's been called a grooming gang as opposed to a rape gang.
No, it's the rape gang scandal. It's
Okay,
not
so
grooming
why are
is too
people
soft.
calling it grooming gangs?
Well, people started to use grooming because this was about gangs of men coming together to groom, to prepare children for sex trafficking. But actually what they were doing, they were raping children. So there's been a
Right.
turn in the
So it is a
debate.
rape gang. Okay.
It's a rape gang
So-
scandal, which, by the way, was
Okay.
another downstream effect of our mass immigration experiment. You need
Okay.
to be crystal clear, because a lot of people aren't. Mass immigration, an effect of that, has been the rape gang scandal because it has overwhelmingly involved Pakistani Muslim men.
Okay, so you really need to help me understand things here, because I legitimately do not understand. So explain the rape gang scandal in like 2 minutes.
From the 1980s onwards, gangs of mainly Pakistani Muslim men were preying on children, getting them addicted to heroin, cocaine, and alcohol, and were then cultivating them for sexual purposes and were trafficking them around other towns in the UK. Hundreds of thousands, maybe more than 1 million children were abused in this way, and public officials and institutions ignored it, downplayed it, turned a blind eye because they were scared of upsetting community relations and being seen as racist or far right. So the rape gang scandal basically was being downplayed until, well, really two things happened. A couple of renegade journalists started talking about it, and then Elon Musk in January 2025 said, what on earth's going on here? The mass rape of children. Why hasn't there been a national inquiry? And as you and I are talking now in June 2025, the Labour government has finally been forced, thanks to Elon Musk, has been forced into holding a national inquiry into the mass rape of our children.
Okay, so I always feel a little uncomfortable about this particular subject.
Well, you shouldn't be anymore. This is a taboo that we have to overcome.
Yeah.
Because everybody's thrown it under the carpet.
You're right. Okay, so, I mean, I have kids myself like you. That's
why I feel so absolutely outraged by it. And I talk about it all the time because the political class has basically put the interests of a minority community, Pakistani Muslims, ahead of the interests of our children, which is completely crazy to me.
So I read reports where police were called to a home by parents. Parents were forbidden from police from entering the home, and then the police raped the girls.
Well, I haven't heard that particular story. I've heard that police officers have been involved in the gang. Some police officers have been arrested. I've heard that police officers stopped the fathers of the children from entering the apartments. We know that social workers were complicit. We know Labour councillors were complicit.
Okay, so then why didn't the government investigate that?
Because it didn't want to upset Muslims, and they were basically more Labour, don't forget, gets much of its support from Muslim voters. Labour did not want to upset these clan networks in Labour-held seats, but also it's classic liberal progressivism. They basically prioritise social justice over the need for truth and actual justice for white working class girls.
So I don't know what the response is, but let me give you what I think the response may be, and you tell me what you think of it. Perhaps they're thinking, well, we have so many immigrants in the country now, and we have so many people from Muslim groups that if we were to investigate and find people guilty, there'd be large-scale riots that we couldn't contain. Is that the thinking?
I think actually the calculation partly is on both sides of this debate. I think firstly they are concerned about offending Muslims because they need Muslims for support. But secondly, they're actually, and they've said this, they are openly scared that the white British majority will start rioting and protesting once the scale of this abuse becomes clear. And we saw that after the Southport atrocities when 3 little girls were murdered by the son of Rwandan immigrants. That was exactly what happened. The British people said, we've had enough of this. We've had enough of bringing people in who don't share our values. We've had enough of bringing people in who break the law. We've had enough of bringing people in who basically rape and abuse our kids. We want an end to it. And this all comes back to the specific, deliberate policy of mass immigration and a state policy of multiculturalism.
Okay, so you have to explain this to me. Because for the life of me, I cannot understand why you're committing cultural suicide. What is the reason for why are you doing this?
Well, first of all, I'm not doing it. Our political class is doing it, and they are united in holding the same view, which is that mass immigration is a good thing. They believe it's beneficial for society.
Okay, break that down. How is it beneficial? I'd love for someone to actually explain that to me.
Well, I think there are two things going on in Britain. The first is we have a political class, that has been shaped by the legacy of empire, that believes we have an obligation to other nations around the world.
Oh, so it's moral and not practical.
Well, there's an element of that, but I think also it is like it is in Canada and America, where you have liberal progressives who now see diversity as a higher value than their obligation to the nation state.
Okay, so that argument I understand. I don't agree with it, but I understand it.
That's basically what's going on in Britain. The only difference is our so-called Conservative Party became progressives.
Okay, but wasn't it sold by Tony Blair, and correct me if I'm wrong, as a necessary component of an economy to replace an aging workforce? That was a practical argument that he gave.
Well, that's an argument that many people on the left give. It's a completely ridiculous
Yeah,
argument.
Eric
And
Kaufman's work has completely debunked that.
yeah, it's absolute nonsense. And also, all that does is push you into a population trap because immigrants get old too. So then you just need more people to support aging immigrants. It's a Ponzi scheme, right?
Yeah.
What you need to do is boost the birth rates, but we'll come and talk about that later on. Tony Blair basically presided over, let's put this in perspective,
Okay.
2004, Blair opens the floodgates to workers from across Central and Eastern Europe. And that kind of peaks at around net migration levels of around 300,000, right? So 300,000 more people coming in than leaving, okay? And they're mainly for the sort of low-skill service sector economy, electricians, plumbers, waitresses, waiters, that kind of stuff. Brexit then happens. That net migration level of 300,000 goes up to nearly 1 million. Okay, so we're running net migration at nearly 1 million. The only difference is most of those people are now from outside of Europe, not from inside of Europe. But now the economic argument, which was never strong to begin with, is visibly falling apart.
Right.
Because even government departments and agencies now accept that the kind of migration we have, low skill, low wage, non-European, is taking more out of the national economy than it's putting in. This is a really important point. The expert class tell us they're interested in evidence, in truth. Actually, if you look at the objective analysis that's been done and how immigration is affecting the UK economy, it is making us poorer. This is a critical point. The expert class love to talk about, what is misinformation and information and all the rest of it. There is no real evidence that mass migration is making anybody more prosperous. It's doing the opposite.
Yeah.
It's pushing us into managed decline.
Incarceration rates, tax.
Oh, I mean, it's driving crime. It's exacerbating the housing crisis. It's dividing our society. But of course, in the world of liberal progressivism, where the love of diversity has become a new religion, they can never accept this. I mean, you've seen this in North America. It's like, however much evidence you present to them, they cannot accept that this religion is being questioned.
That's because I think they make the moral argument.
Well, you tell me, from your experience in North America.
Well, they won't have a conversation with you. I have no idea, but I'm just inferring
let's say I went up to AOC, Elizabeth Warren, whoever, and said, here is all the evidence to show migration is making North America poorer. Why would they never accept that?
That's a very good question. The only thing I can think of is that they think other people are entitled to a better life. They think that they're the poor peoples of the world who they would view as the United States and our Western allies have exploited them. Now it's time for a kind of, not repatriation, but a kind of reparations that allow people to live in this.
Okay, which then raises another question. What about the hardworking, law-abiding, tax-paying majority from that country? What do they deserve? Do they deserve to be pushed in a managed decline?
I think that they would
so
say...
we can just have an elite class that makes itself feel better about itself?
I can be completely wrong about this, but I think that they would say people need cheap produce.
I mean,
I can't, that's all I got.
There's more to life than GDP. There's more to a nation than, cheap products on a supermarket shelf. And I think this is the fundamental problem. You've got millions of people out there in the West that really love their nation, or as Roger Scruton called it, their home, and they just feel like it's being trashed. I mean, the UK basically was, Britain, England was one of the most successful nation states in the history of nation states, united by a strong identity, strong sense of history, collective memory, a shared set of values, a way of life. What is happening, Peter, is it is being turned into, let's say, it's going from the Ritz into a pretty shitty two-star hotel where you don't really know who you're living next to. You don't even know if they share your values. They probably don't share your identity. They certainly don't share your way of life. We have 1 million people in the UK who cannot speak English. We have 1 million people who cannot speak English.
Amazing.
Nearly half of all social housing in London has gone to families that are headed by somebody who was not born in the UK. How can you sustain a social contract like that? This is like the deeper question that I think you asked me at the outset, what's happening to the UK? This is a deeper question.
And you don't
How
think
do you sustain the social contract in that
obviously
situation?
it can't be sustained, obviously, but you don't think that the reason, or do you think that the fact that they're afraid of revolt or violent uprising from minority communities, I can't help but think that has something to do with it.
Well, we have a professor in the UK, a guy, David Betts. He's quite interesting. He's just written a paper. Now, his argument, if I get it right, I think this is broadly what he's saying. There are two things that are pushing the UK and the West towards civil war. One is inter-ethnic conflict.
Right.
You're basically bringing in groups, Muslims, Hindu, Sikh, whatever, that can't quite unite. They've got an underlying tension. But the second dimension is on that is kind of vertical. You've got a tension between the rulers of that country and the ruled, the people and the elites. And that is being stretched to such an extent. So you're basically hollowing out these nations from within. And I think we got a glimpse of that in the aftermath of the Southport atrocities, where that social contract for a couple of days just seemed to disappear. Nobody was willing to be deferential to political and legal authorities anymore. And those inter-ethnic aspects came to the fore. Muslims doubled down on Muslim tribalism. White Brits doubled down on their identity, and you just saw the state basically vacate.
Okay, so we have some mutual friends in the UK, many of whom are Jewish, and they have expressed in no uncertain terms that they are beyond the point of concern and into the realm of worry.
Well, they're probably leaving. Nearly 100,000 Brits left last year. I probably suspect a good number of those will be British Jews who are looking around thinking, what the hell is happening to this society? And they've got good reason to feel worried, because we have, in many respects, a country that has become, as we call it, two-tier. It's more interested in prioritizing minorities over the majority.
God, I just...
You know, I'll give you one example. Give you one example.
I honestly don't... I'm trying to understand. I just
Well,
don't get it.
You've seen it in America.
Okay, give me the example.
Well, just imagine for a second, you know, AOC and Elizabeth Warren were running America with Gavin Newsom. Like, that's kind of what you've got, is a sort of liberal, progressive
Oh my God,
consensus.
I'm not going to sleep at night.
And now imagine in that situation being a moderate Republican or a kind of a swing voter or whatever.
Or what about just a sane independent?
Just a sane independent looking around thinking, what the fuck is happening to my country here?
Yeah.
You know, and that's how I feel. It's how millions of people feel.
So,
the example I was going to give you, let me
give me
this
that.
example. If you want to know how crazy things have become, so we have this Southport atrocity, right? 3 girls are murdered by the son of Rwandan migrants. What then happens? The Brits hit the streets. They protest, many of them peacefully. The state then clamps down. And you start seeing people sent to prison and hauled off into prison because they are saying on social media that they're not happy with this status quo, right? They're not happy with this consensus. And one of those people is Lucy Connolly, who's a young mother and wife. And her husband's very sick, and she just previously lost a child. And after the murder of these 3 girls, Lucy Connolly gets out her phone and she basically tweets something that's pretty offensive. I wouldn't personally agree with it, but she says basically, it's too many immigrants, you know, get them all out. If that makes me a racist, I'm a racist. Along those lines. She's sent to prison for nearly 3 years for what she tweeted. Now, she got a longer prison sentence than members of the rape gangs. In some areas, we had a Telford rape gang where the people got a shorter prison sentence than she did.
Okay.
Now, I'm not even exaggerating these stories. This is just
No, I know. I've read about
knowledge.
it. Okay, so I need your help. Explain to me what the thinking is there, because I can understand the thinking we need cheap vegetables.
You know exactly what the thinking is. They're terrified. They're losing power. So the state is clamping down. It's expanding norms like far-right, Islamophobia, hate. It is restricting free speech and free expression. It is trying to manage community relations while shutting down anything that can present viable opposition to the state. Like Marine Le Pen is getting blocked from standing in France, like what happened in Romania with the presidential candidate, like what happened with the German AfD that was almost stopped from running at elections because it was designated to be extremist. This is the state trying to basically curtail viable opposition.
Yeah,
that is what is happening here.
I was actually surprised that the AfD didn't do better. Okay, so explain this free speech crisis to me.
Yeah, so basically what we've had over the last 5, 10, 15 years is a concerted attempt by politicians on both the left and the right to restrict the public square. And that's involved a lot of things. We've got a new definition of Islamophobia, whereby talking about Islam in particular ways will basically be considered unacceptable. We've got these hate laws, including things like non-crime hate incidents, whereby if people perceive that they've been offended in some way, they can log a police complaint against their fellow citizens. So obviously that creates chilling effects on society. And more fundamentally, we've had mainstream politicians throwing around concepts like far-right, extremist, to shut down debate about these policies that we've been talking about, mass immigration being the obvious one. So to a Labour politician, you know, I'm a far-right, extremist, Islamophobe, but those terms are completely meaningless now. They've been expanded to try and control the supply and direction of debate.
So, okay, so if you criticize specific aspects of the Quran, is that a hate speech crime?
So we're having blasphemy laws in the UK introduced through the back door, basically. I mean, we've had a guy who's just been hauled before the courts because he burnt a Quran. We've got a school teacher who is still in hiding because he showed a cartoon of Muhammad in a school classroom, still in hiding today. No one in mainstream politics talks about that. We had a boy with autism hauled before a community court with police officers and imams to apologize because he dropped a Quran on the floor. You know, these are just micro examples. We also, by the way, have 85 Sharia courts. We have over...
Like a parallel judicial architecture?
A parallel legal system, basically, in our country. Now, all of that should be scrapped, in my view. Cousin marriage should be scrapped.
Oh, well, let's
Burqa
talk
should
about
be
that. But
banned.
let's stick to the free speech. So, are the same laws about on the books about Christianity or Hinduism? Like, can you criticize the Bhagavad Gita? Can you criticize the Bible? Can you?
We are the home of free speech. You should be able to criticize any and every religion.
But like legally, can you?
Yes. You can criticize any religion you want to. The issue with Islamophobia and the definition with it, I'll give you two examples. The original definition agreed in 2018 included mentioning the rape gangs, talking about them as an example of Islamophobia, and included demographic changes, talking about the threat they pose to the West, especially the rise of Islam, as an example of Islamophobia. Now, I've just released a report in the UK
I read that.
that shows nearly 1 in 4 people by the end of this century in the UK will be following Islam. Nearly 1 in 3 among the under 40s. Okay? So if we're getting this pressure now to suppress free speech and free expression, what's it going to be like at the end of the century?
So, okay, so I have a couple of questions. What can be done about this?
Well, we need to strip all hate laws off the statute books. We need to scrap these things called non-crime hate incidents. We need to remove any blasphemy laws through the back door. We need to shut down Sharia courts, and we need to make it absolutely crystal clear that we are the country of common law. We believe in equality before the law. We believe in free speech, free expression, and that's the basis of our civilization. We basically need a factory reset. We need to go back to the pre-Tony Blair era in terms of how we think about free speech issues.
Well, what if they don't want to shut down Sharia courts?
Who?
But the people running the imams, what if they just refuse?
Well, I mean, like anybody else refuses to follow a particular law, you know, we use the state and we use the judiciary to enforce consequences.
I don't know. I was at the, last year, I was at the protests, the Palestinian, and I would actually call them Hamas as well, protests. And
yeah, they were.
I mean, there were a lot of people there.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you look at where we're going to go over the next 75 years, the Muslim population is currently 7%. Okay, by the end of the century, it'll be somewhere around 21, 22%. Sweden, it'll be 30 to 40%. So, you know, you're going to see wholesale changes. Now, that could even be quicker than I'm forecasting if you continue to have very high levels of migration from mainly Muslim nations.
So I've argued repeatedly that you should surrender and cut a deal for yourself.
Yeah, we're not at, I don't think we're at that particular fork in the road.
So you think you genuinely believe that this problem can be headed off?
It needs radical wholesale political change. We need a government from outside of the established left and right. And we need to do two things. We need to end immediately mass uncontrolled immigration and immediate freeze halt on that migration.
Okay, how realistic, like, really how realistic is that?
Very realistic. We could do that. We basically did it during the COVID pandemic for a period of time.
But if you really wanted to do it, you would have done it already.
No, if the people wanted to do it, it would have been done, but the elites have not wanted to do it. We now have a party, number one in the polls, the Reform Party. Its policy is an immediate freeze on all non-essential migration. And by non-essential, we mean migration that does not directly contribute to things like the National Health Service. Only about 2 or 3% of all visas went to people working in the NHS.
And they're from India primarily, aren't they?
Some of them, yeah. Some of them from elsewhere in the world. But anyway, the first thing we need to do, end mass uncontrolled immigration. The second thing we need to do is have a radical overhaul of our integration policies, much similar to Denmark, and much less likely like the UK. So we need to start breaking up segregated areas of the country. We need to start forcing assimilation rather than having this soft laissez-faire approach. And we need to start actually getting back to the idea that unless we can figure out what the social contract is and have one, we're not going to have a viable nation state.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you something I have been wondering about and concerned about for a long time. Eric Coffin was actually the one who gave me this idea. So we know the metrics are in, we have the data for the number of people incarcerated, where they're from, for who takes from the Treasury and who contributes to the Treasury. And we know that there's one group consistently who contributes to the Treasury and have the lowest incarceration rates of anyone, and they're the Japanese. We know this. That's the data. That's our mutual friend Eric's data. Instead of just putting a moratorium on migration, why don't we like draw a cutoff line and say the top, well, why don't your people draw a kind of cutoff line and say the top 3 countries in which they have the lowest incarceration rates and contribute most to the Treasury, we're going to have an open immigration policy for them, and everybody else, there's going to be an absolute moratorium.
Well, we did try to do something like that after Brexit, where we had a discussion about having high-skill migration.
That's what the Australians do in New Zealand. That's what they do.
Boris Johnson then lied to the country, and he did the opposite of that. So yes, in theory, I agree with you. We need to be much more selective. I'd also include criminality in that.
Yeah.
You know, I'll give you an example. If you look at sexual assaults and rapes, Afghans and Eritreans are 20 times more likely than Brits to be arrested and to be convicted of those crimes. So we started adjusting visa programs for those countries. Same with drug dealing, Albanians, money laundering. We need to start being much more selective at who we take. So we also need to control the borders. We need to invest in integration.
Explain to me, so I don't understand why that's controversial. If we know that certain groups are responsible for radically disproportionate percentages
It's not controversial. It's only controversial among a 10% elite. It's not controversial among the vast majority of people, hardworking, tax-paying Brits. They would want to see that. The only people that oppose that are the expert class who are united by this universal liberalism. They think everybody's the same. They think everybody's as equal as one another. They think all cultures are equal. That's clearly not the case. Otherwise, why would they be trying to get to the UK? Okay, only some cultures create prosperity, and only some cultures create institutions, and only some cultures contribute to, this wonderful civilization we have in the West. A lot of people out there don't really understand the extent to which all of that is being drained away by the likes of people from inferior cultures, to be frank.
It's extraordinary that itself is such a controversial...
That's not controversial. It's only controversial among the ruling class.
And when you say the ruling class, who do you mean?
I mean, like the 10.
Tories,
by that I mean the 10 to 15% elite graduate class, a lean left, are socially liberal, radically progressive. They live in big cities. They have very small social networks that are filled with lots of people who look like them, think like them, have the same backgrounds as them. But the forgotten majority are like, well, you no longer hold my values. You don't represent my voice. You don't speak for me anymore. Which is why the elite class is losing power, and it's why it's trying to restrict free speech and free expression, because it can sense it's now losing that dominance over the political system.
So the perennial question then of why the elite class supports unrestricted immigration, which has been a theme of our conversation, is how would you answer that question?
It feeds into their sense of moral righteousness. They want to, it's suicidal empathy, to quote Gad Saad. They are so consumed with notions of fairness and empathy, and also narcissism. The elite class is very narcissistic. They want to feel good about themselves. They want to feel superior, morally superior to everybody else. And migration and diversity is a way they can do that, by jamming it into everybody else's face and forcing them to live with the consequences of their decisions. They're also, as Rob Henderson has shown, they're not the people who are affected by it. You know, they're living in nice neighborhoods with low crime rates, secure neighborhoods. They're affluent. They've got economic security. These are not the people that are going to be displaced on the outskirts of London. They're not the people that are going to have to live with their children being preyed upon by rape gangs in northern towns. You know, those are white working class kids, white working class families.
Yeah, the rape gangs are a working class phenomenon, aren't they?
Yeah, now the irony is the Labour Party was founded to represent the working class. The Labour Party was the last institution in Britain to do anything about the wholesale rape of working class children. So that's how bad things have become.
So tell me why you're hopeful. Are you hopeful because reform is #1 in the polls now?
That's one big reason. I think and this isn't actually about Nigel Farage and reform. The people are forcing a correction. That's what they did with Brexit. They're now doing it with reform. They're forcing a correction of the system. They're using Nigel Farage and reform to do that. So they're saying the system has gone too far away from them. They want to pull it back. They want it to be closer to their worldview, and they want to change these policies. So I've always viewed, political parties are always symbolic of something else. And the rise of reform is a correction. That's what it is symbolizing. Like Brexit was a correction, managed terribly by the elite class, but it was a correction.
And are you hopeful?
For the first time, yeah. Yeah, I think I think the system is going to be smashed apart in the next 10 years. And I think the other important point is over the last 10 years, the Brits have become used to radical change, which they weren't. Go back to the 50s, social scientists used to say the Brits were unified by civic culture. They didn't like radical change. They just liked things to be as it is. Now, with Brexit, we've had Jeremy Corbyn on the left, we've had Boris Johnson, we've now got Nigel Farage and reform. The Brits are being socialized into radical change. They're becoming more radical. Now, the elite class might complain about that and say, well, that's not a particularly great place to be. Well, you created this. You created this by jamming these policies down people's throats. Mass migration, woke ideology, broken borders. You're forcing British taxpayers to live in a country with open borders, where we don't know who is coming in, where they're coming from, what they believe. All we know is that some of them have been terrorists. How is that acceptable? But that's the truth.
Yeah, no, I know.
Iranian terrorists came over on the small boats. We know that. How is this acceptable? I mean, I expect people to revolt. And if this reform revolt doesn't work and the political ballot box doesn't work, I think people potentially will start just taking to the streets because it's existential. It's like people can sense they're losing this thing they love. And that thing is their country, which is otherwise known as their home.
And their freedoms.
Yeah, absolutely. Freedom, individual liberty, institutions. And we're at a point, I think, across the West, where you've got countries like Hungary that have made a very deliberate, conscious choice. We're not going to go down the road of social liberalism.
Poland.
We're going to try and hold the line. Yeah. Poland as well. And you've got countries like the UK that have gone all in on not just social liberalism, but radical progressivism.
Sweden.
And look at the consequences. California. Canada.
Canada.
Do these look like healthy, united societies? I think wherever you've had strong liberalism and the guardrails have gone, you've removed nation, you've removed community, you've removed family, you've removed religion, you've done everything you can to flatten society. I think the effects have been very visible. And you can you're in Portland, you can just see what's happened.
It's a cesspool of human filth.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, come and visit London one day, I'll show you some neighborhoods.
Yeah, when I was in Whitechapel, I was just astonished. Like, I just couldn't believe it. Like, if someone flew me around in a helicopter and dropped me off, said, where are you? I would say, I don't know. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, I don't know.
I had a friend from the US. He came to London recently. He couldn't handle it. He was supposed to be there for the week. He came for 3 days and left. It's like, it's dirty, it's high crime, it's empty at night, it closes early. London, I've been in and out of London since 1981. Like, London's over. London is over. Like, it's done. It's not a healthy, vibrant, growing, positive city
I
anymore.
tell you what, last time, or the penultimate time I was there, I was on my phone, and some guy came by in a bike and ripped the phone out of my hand. And did I tell you this story?
Do you know how many times that happened last year?
No.
90,000. 90,000 people like you had their smartphones taken off them in London. Because that has now been mainstreamed. And I guarantee most of those, nothing happened with the police. Shoplifting's been mainstreamed. Theft has been mainstreamed. Violent crime is now rising.
I just, maybe I'm just thinking about this the wrong way. I've said this to people before, and they've looked at me like I'm insane, but there have to be people there who want to live like that. I mean,
I think there are Londoners that are so, like liberals, are so consumed with being liberal and projecting what they think they should project to the world that they will tolerate things that most people would not tolerate. It's like that John McWhorter thing of it being a religion, a new religion, that once you're in it, you have to go all in. And you have to keep shouting about it from the rooftops. And you have to keep aligning yourself with it and showing off the symbols of it and shouting down anybody who challenges it, the heretics. And you have to...
The blasphemers.
Yeah, and I think the more that I've looked at progressivism as a religion, the more it makes sense to me. The symbols, the pride flags, the statues, the mantras, diversity is our strength. If you just view it as a religion, it makes a lot more sense.
Matt Goodwin, thanks a lot for talking to me.
Thanks for
Appreciate it.
walking me around
man.
Budapest.
Thanks.